We have allowed participants who have registered to come in. Let's give them a few minutes before we start. We'll start in a minute. Good morning, everyone, and I would like to welcome I see a little over 100 participants who have entered our webinar. We have had, as of this morning, a little over 600 registrations. Hopefully, they can all join us within the next 2 hours. But welcome to Strat-based ADR Institute's Virtual Business Roundtable in partnership with Bauer Group Asia. We entitled this webinar's Business Agenda for the new administration. As we enter the mid part of the 2022 election, I think it is good to see where the private sector is with regards to how can they become part of recovery post-election, post-COVID. So again, welcome to everyone, and allow me to introduce for our opening remarks from our partner, Bauer Group Asia, based in Washington, D.C. Mr. Ernest Bauer is the founder, president, and CEO of the Bauer Group Asia, a premier strategic advisory firm working with the world's top companies across the Indo-Pacific region. He has been a friend of the Philippines for more than 3 decades in his previous role as president of the U.S. ASEAN Business Council, I think for a decade, if I would remember it right. So, Mr. Ernie Bauer, can you have the floor now? And thank you for joining us and partnering with Strat-based ADRi.
Dindo, thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm really grateful to my friends and colleagues, Ambassador Del Rosario and Dindo Manhit, for partnering Strat-based ADRi with Bauer Group Asia to bring you this series of roundtable discussions leading up to the election in May. I'm particularly grateful to Dindo for inviting me to open today's discussion to share a business perspective on the economic agenda for a new administration in the Philippines. It's a very special honor to be joining such a highly qualified group of friends and business leaders from the Philippines. After working with many of you on these issues over the last 3 decades, I feel like I may be an adopted son of the Philippines. But I know, especially among these experts, that my contribution today will be to share the view of the business potential of the Philippines from that of a friend who works with companies seeking to invest and grow in Asia. So the question is, how can the next Philippine administration take advantage of these opportunities? First, I think it's important to put the Philippine economy in context in Asia. It's done relatively well, not just during the pandemic, but over the last 20 years. It's proven its resilience and regularly been one of the top ASEAN performers for GDP growth. But it's clear that more ambition is needed from the next administration. It's time to ask not, are we doing okay, but what can we do if we work together as government, the private sector, and the country's talented, hardworking people? I think the Philippines primed for outperform growth, especially given the drivers of the new economy, where digital innovation, ESG, and connectedness are the premier assets. Relative to some of its more progressive neighbors, the Philippines has traditionally been perceived to lean towards a more protective posture, focusing on protecting domestic business instead of enlarging the economy and encouraging national champions to scale and become regional and global leaders. A new administration with confidence and a strong partnership with business can change that perspective and drive new opportunities, equitable growth, creating jobs and driving more prosperity than ever before. Please believe me, I am sharing this recommendation with full humility as an American. After Mr. Trump removed the United States from TPP as his first act in office 5 years ago, we have been stuck without a truly forward-leaning trade policy in Asia. So my perspective is not as a government official, but as a business executive and a friend. The greatest potential to drive new business opportunities in the Philippines is to focus on a smart and careful integration in the Asian and global economies, focusing on sectors where the Philippines have special advantages and have confidence in the skills and talents of Filipinos. Globally, Russia's recent invasion of the Ukraine, coming in the midst of COVID-19 and US-China competition, is an important reminder of how connected we are. Countries and companies alike are discovering how affected they can be economically, geopolitically, and diplomatically by a single event somewhere else in the world. Many are now seeing for the first time Ukraine's important role as a leading exporter of agricultural products and Russia's impact on global energy prices. Southeast Asia is an important part of that global conversation in a way that is relevant for business. Just take one example. Last week, Singapore had the equivalent of what we might call a Germany moment with an unprecedented move to impose sanctions on Russia. That came just a few weeks after Singapore doubled down on its commitment to free trade by signing a free trade pact with the Latin American countries, many of the Latin American countries, as part of a new Pacific Alliance, the 8th largest free trade agreement in the world. The core importance of global interconnectivity could not be more relevant for Southeast Asia than in this year. We have the G20 itself set up during the global financial crisis for Asia, being hosted by Indonesia for the first time. That puts Indonesia and ASEAN in a position to shape agenda items that companies are watching closely, including the global minimum tax, digitization, and global health. Regionally, Asia has been reinforcing its role as the world's economic integration engine. Implementation of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, in January, the ratification of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, and the proliferation of digital agreements are all testament to that fact. Even in sector-specific areas, Southeast Asian countries are beginning to lead and drive the conversation, and the Philippines must not be left behind its neighbors. For example, as part of the APEC chairmanship this year, Thailand is advancing its biocircular green economic model as a path to sustainable recovery, carving out a green niche for itself. The United States is already working with Thailand to figure out how it can integrate this theme for the US hosting of APEC in 2023. So how can the Philippines leverage this environmental trend more robustly? This regional activity is a magnet for Indo-Pacific countries and is shaping their engagement. China's attempts to join CPTPP and digital agreements accelerated the Biden administration's timeline in putting together its own Indo-Pacific economic framework and engaging more earnestly with Southeast Asia, which will be center stage with the upcoming US-ASEAN Special Summit in Washington, DC in just 3 weeks. The Philippines has a crucial role to play as part of this conversation. As Dindo and his team have been noting in the lead up to May's election, there are many domestic issues in the Philippines that are shared concerns for other countries amid COVID-19, be it the rising medical needs, disinformation, or transparency. These calls for not just government, but very importantly, governance, or what Dindo has called a three-pronged governance anchored by government, the private sector, and civil society, in a way is people-centered, sustainable, and globally competitive. The Philippines can also be part of the story of what opportunities in the diverse path to can be part of the opportunities for the diverse paths to economic recovery. For instance, easing of the movement restrictions and resuming cross-border travel that will stimulate intergovernmental cooperation on issues like vaccine records and change the conversation around consumer-facing industries such as food and beverages, tourism, and the meeting and conference industry. This cannot be accomplished by government alone and will require private sector input. Of course, the economic outlook won't be without its share of change or challenges. Apart from the election in the Philippines, other countries like South Korea and Australia are set to hold elections as well. And there are other key developments to watch, including China's Party Congress and the ongoing crisis in Myanmar. Countries will also adjust their monetary and fiscal policies in response to shared challenges, including rising inflation and surging energy prices if Russia's aggression in the Ukraine continues and as the US Federal Reserve considers its own rate hike timeline. So a new administration in the Philippines must tightly align with the private sector there to decide how to take advantage of the opportunities provided by the geopolitical tension between China and the United States. Manila will see offers and opportunities to engage with a number of new economic initiatives related to forums such as the Quad, led by Australia, India, Japan, and the US. AUKUS, the Australia, United Kingdom, and US agreement that is focused mostly on security, but will include important economic opportunities and challenges. And the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the Biden administration's new economic strategy for Asia. China will also offer opportunities through vehicles like the Belt and Road Initiative, the AAIB, or Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and others. So the next Philippine administration should play a much more robust role in Asia's dynamic multilateralism than the last, and use thoughtful discretion to weigh its economic interest with its desire to see geopolitical balance and promote the country's national security effectively. While I've focused my opening lens on a more international business agenda for the new administration, I know our speakers today will balance these ideas with their insights on more domestic issues. In the interconnected world we live in today, these thrusts cannot be separated. So Dindo, Albert, thank you again for inviting me to join you, and I look forward to our discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ernie, for comprehensive discussion from a regional point of view. We're always thankful for those information that you share as you engage not only with policymakers in Washington, D.C., but also as you have traveled. I know you were just in Singapore a few weeks back, engaging with Singapore government leadership and top multinational corporate executives. Thank you. Allow me to move and to our next part of the program, but I'd like to introduce our moderator, one of our friends, supporter in the Institute, Attorney Karen Jimeno, a Chief Legal Counsel of the SoftCap Partners, also currently a policy and regulatory specialist for the World Bank. But we know her as somebody that has served government in her younger years as Undersecretary of Public Works and also the Presidential Management Staff. Attorney Karen, I'll turn over the program to you.
Thank you, Dindo, for that introduction. It's always a pleasure for me to be part of the events of ADR Strat-Based Institute. And thank you for having me again today. Thank you also to Bauer Group Asia for hosting this forum in partnership with Strat-Based ADR. And thank you, Ernie Bauer, our adopted Filipino brother, for that wonderful opening statement. So for the first part of the program, we'll be talking about policy recommendations for the next administration. The next administration's ability to produce robust, inclusive economic growth will hinge largely on their heeding of expert recommendations. Today, we will hear from the nation's leading voices on which issues must be addressed to lay the foundations for a strong business performance. Competent governance must necessarily accompany any business agenda. The two are dependent upon each other. And for the first section of part one, we'll be talking about pursuing an investment-led, more sustainable economic growth. Our speaker is Mr. Diwa Ginigundo. Mr. Ginigundo served at the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas for 41 years, retiring from service as the Deputy Governor for the Monetary and Economic Sector. A career central banker, he was the driving force behind the BSP's advocacy for economic and financial literacy to address the issue of poverty. Mr. Ginigundo, it's my pleasure to introduce you.
Thank you very much, Karen. And I also have to thank Ernie for emphasizing the global and regional political and economic context of our conversation this morning. On my part, I am very pleased to be able to share with you some broad ideas on how to ensure that we transition to the new normal, knowing fully well we have most of what it takes to grow in a more sustainable and inclusive way, and what else we need to do to ensure we keep to the course and achieve quick economic recovery to pre-pandemic levels. Now, let me show the next slide. What is so special about these two charts? The first shows we managed to sustain 20 years of uninterrupted positive economic growth, averaging around 5.4%. This long period of macroeconomic stability was broken by the pandemic with 5 quarters of output contraction. We failed to immediately arrest the spread of the pandemic, so we resorted to the strictest physical lockdown. And in the process, we also locked down the economy. It froze, and we have one of the deepest recession in many years. This could be a case of punctuated equilibrium. The next chart will show that prior to the pandemic, next chart please, we can say the following about the Philippine economy. Number one, for nearly 30 years from the time of President Ramos to the current administration, we have undertaken critical strategic policy and structural reforms in the macroeconomy, social governance, infrastructure, investments, financial system, and public finance. These reforms have inspired business trust and confidence, and in the process, increased investments. We want to duplicate this and continue with this. Second, with this series of policy and structural reforms, we have achieved sound macroeconomic fundamentals and even policy space, sustainable growth, low and stable price movements, manageable current account position, more than sufficient external buffers, a strong public finance, and broadly strong and good debt metrics. Monetary policy can adjust interest rate and liquidity as the need arises. The government can spend more in infra and social services as necessary. This strong macroeconomic performance has also further attracted both foreign, direct, and portfolio investments to produce more growth and more jobs. Third, as we introduce those policy and structural reforms, we allowed market forces to encourage more competition. And this has resulted in greater productivity and economic efficiency. With our young population, the demographic factor has worked in our favor so far. The pressure on the labor market for higher wages has been generally subdued, except for the usual adjustment for inflation, and has established more labor market conditions conducive to long-term investment. And fourth, our promising economic prospects have received third-party affirmations from international financial institutions, credit rating agencies, and research outfits and think tanks. Our credit rating has been upgraded to investment level. The next chart would show what's behind the punctuation of equilibrium. In more ways than one, the pandemic derailed the Philippines' track to its strategic development target to be an upper middle income country. The pandemic triggered a health and economic crisis due to the imposed lockdown. 3 points. First, the economy being services reliant proved to be non-pandemic proof. Tourist-related establishments like hotels, restaurants, even gym, and wellness centers had to be closed during the pandemic. Second, the pandemic also unmasked the extent of underinvestment in the health and other relevant sectors. A well-functioning healthcare system is not sufficient to effectively respond to disease outbreaks of similar scale. A more robust system for health is needed to effectively respond to pandemics. This comprises integrated development of all sectors that influence public health outcomes such as transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, and even development, urban development. Finally, third point, pandemic costs to the real economy have been found to persist for many years. Failure to arrest the pandemic has huge implications to economic recovery, while maintaining the focus on addressing the health emergency and providing lifelines for households and small businesses is essential. Governments also need to prepare economies for the transition to the post-COVID-19 world. Now, the next chart will show the case for investment-led growth. Investment-led growth, ladies and gentlemen and friends, has always been the goal of public policy because it promotes sustainable and resilient economic growth. Public spending also plays a great part in promoting economic growth. Fear about possible crowding out of private investment by public investment based on empirical data holds only when political and economic institutions are bad or are weak. Why else should we promote investment? One, there is a need to fill up the large deficiencies in the healthcare system that unfolded during the pandemic. We need to invest not only in the health sector itself, but also in schools, safe buildings, safe transportation, and digital infrastructure. We need to invest in disease surveillance and preparedness to help prevent a recurrence of the pandemic. And two, investment could help in the transition to the post-pandemic world. Investment could help mitigate economic scarring from labor productivity losses by helping people get back to work. Empirical studies show that every 1% of GDP increase in public investment could increase GDP by 2.7%, private investment by 10%, and employment by 1.2%. Conditions, number one, investment should be of high quality and there are little impediments to private investment response. Public investments have also been found to generate between 2 to 8 jobs for every $1 million spent on traditional infrastructure. Now, how do we pursue investment-led growth? The next chart, please. The fundamental challenge is to create an environment that is conducive to investment, whether domestic or foreign. If such push factors like the US Fed, change of monetary policy, risk appetite, and policy spillovers from other countries, like what is happening in Ukraine, they are negative to foreign investors, we should make sure we have the counterweights here in the Philippines. For instance, we should be conscious of some interest rate differential, exchange rate movements, sound macroeconomic fundamentals, like good inflation prospects, public finance and policy space, good infra, and of course, good governance. If these pull factors are favorable, even portfolio investments could transform into direct investment because our long-term prospects are good. Second point, we need to always promote good political and economic institutions. Acemoglu and Robinson of Why Nations Fail were very clear in arguing that inclusive institutions that create incentives for people to innovate, enable productivity growth through education and infrastructure, and third, maintain peace and order. They are all essential in creating an environment that is conducive to sustainable growth. In contrast, extractive institutions or those catered to oligarchic interests tend to result in poverty and stagnant growth, even in resource-rich economies like what many African countries experienced in the past. Third point, we need to establish appropriate infrastructure. Investments are naturally attracted to areas with adequate roads, ports, and other essential infrastructure because such facilities affect a firm's profitability due to the reduction in production costs and ability to reach wider markets. Poor infra has actually contributed to investment bottlenecks in the Philippines. In 2019, the Global Competitiveness Report reported that we rank below many of our regional peers because of the poor quality of our infra in transport, telecom, and even in power. Number 4, we need to go digital by strengthening the digital infrastructure. The pandemic has shown several advantages of the digital economy. The private sector can lead in the innovation of digital products and services that would allow the increase of the breadth and reach of markets even in these difficult times, including banks, to reduce transaction costs, improve services, and reduce viral transmission. The challenge to the regulators and operators of these digital platforms is, of course, to ensure integrity of the whole process. Consumer protection should be paramount. Next, we also need to go green in finance. We need to take care of our environment. Introduction of environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, considerations in investment decisions is very important as they correct for possible market failure. ESG forces firms to consider the real cost to the environment and society that their activities actually impose. This is especially relevant for the Philippines, which is extremely exposed to natural hazards and calamities. This could potentially spill over to the real economy as well as the financial system. Finally, there are critical legislative agenda out there. They should also provide a clear framework that encourages innovation, investment, and competition. The passage of Senate Bill 2904, for example, which seeks to amend the Public Services Law, is expected to boost inflow of investment in the country. Likewise, the lifting of the open pit mining and introduction of terms and conditions to ensure this will be environmentally and socially sustainable will potentially encourage more investments in the country. There should be strong support to these legislative proposals on capital market development, retail trade, secrecy of bank deposits, and other related initiatives. Indeed, an enabling legal and regulatory environment is very crucial for investments to come and flourish in the domestic economy. Now,
Dr.
finally,
Diego?
last chart. Let me
Okay.
conclude by stressing that we need the necessary momentum to help address both the health crisis and the imperative to achieve economic recovery. Investment-led growth can help the Philippine economy transition from the pandemic, mitigate its scarring effects, and establish the foundation for a healthier, more robust post-pandemic scenario. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Ginigundo. And our next speaker is going to talk about reforms for employment, is going to talk about the private sector's role in strengthening democratic institutions and liberalizing the economy. And to talk about this is Mr. Edgar Chua. Mr. Chua is the chairman of the Makati Business Club. He has had many years of experience in the petroleum business as the former country chairman of Shell companies in the Philippines. He is a recipient of the numerous local and international recognitions, including Asia People of the Year 2013 and MAP Management Man of the Year 2013, among others. Or sorry, actually, let me correct that. I jumped to someone else, but our next speaker is Dr. Vicente Paqueo to talk about issues for the next administration's development agenda on human capital and labor markets. Dr. Vic Paqueo is a distinguished visiting fellow at the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. He previously served as professor at the University of the Philippines School of Economics and lead economist for the World Bank. He also served as a consultant to various local and international organizations, such as the International Labor Organization and the World Health Organization. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Vicente Paqueo. And we just like to remind all the speakers to stay within 10 minutes because some of our speakers have commitments that require the limited time for them to be there. So, Mr. Paqueo. Okay, I think if Dr. Paqueo is not yet here, we'll jump to our next speaker who actually needs to go soon anyway, which is why I think it's good that we can have him speak right away. So this is part 2 of our program where we're going to talk about business perspectives. And to talk about public-private sector collaboration for immediate business recovery, we have Mr. George Barcelon. Mr. Barcelon is the president of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the largest business organization in the country. He represents the private sector in the Industry Development Council and National Competitive Council. He is also one of the 3 Philippine representatives to the ASEAN Business Advisory Council and the private sector representative to the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council, or LEDAC. Mr. Barcelon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning to all. I'm pleased to join you today. While virtual meetings like this do have some benefits, I wouldn't mind waiting through the heavy traffic that we're seeing now to have the opportunity to listen to our distinguished panelists. The pandemic that affected us since March 2020, exactly 1 week to the date, has been devastating in all aspects of our life, physically, mentally, emotionally, and most importantly, our economic lives. Today, things have changed a bit from the pandemic upheaval 2 years ago. Now, more than half of our populations have been vaccinated. People are going out of the comfort of their homes and resuming activities. And many are confident to be in enclosed area and go for a family outing. It begs the question, are we out of the wood? Health-wise, I leave the question to the public health of experts. But with respect to the economy, we have a guarded optimism, but we know we still have a long way to go to achieve pre-pandemic status. Even as we are beginning to rebound economically, somehow we're pulled back, or as my friend would put it, we are put in because of the Russia and Ukraine crisis. Even as we speak, energy prices have surged and the supply chains disruption have again reared its ugly head, adding inflationary pressures that our policymakers are already struggling to tackle. With so many issues and priorities, it is critical at this point to take urgent and even drastic measures to build our self-reliance and develop our resilience to external shock. In January, we were threatened by Indonesia's move to ban the export of coal products, a move that had our government scampering to negotiate as our country is heavily dependent on coal for power generation. and we buy most of our requirements from Indonesia. Even now, as Indonesia has lifted the ban on its coal export, we again face mounting pressure on the prices of coal that has jumped up to almost $400 per ton, and other fuel and basic commodities resulting from the Russia-Ukraine war. Our country is indirectly affected with the disruption to global supply and prices, increasing prices, where that heavily weighs with our trading partners such as US, Europe, Japan, and China, with spillover effects on investments, trade, and so forth. Already, local prices have started to escalate the past few weeks. Every week, we have increased price in gasoline and diesel. A development that has impact on transport, fare, and logistics, and eventually could lead to higher costs of commodities, manufactured products, and services. While the Department of Energy and Department of Trade and Industry, in separate statements, gave assurance that there is enough in the country's inventory level of fuel supply, the uncertainty of war has serious ramifications to our recovery. Higher costs of fuel and power will easily intensify into high inflation and stagnate our economic growth. But what is of concern is the increasing cost of living crisis may lead to a call for wage hike. The short-term response in the form of government subsidies will have to be contemplated by the development of a roadmap that will explore our energy options. For instance, our country continues to be a virgin and unexplored country awaiting to be drilled. In Indonesia, they were able to drill 400 wells in 1 year. Our record for drilling for oils in the past so many decades is just meeting the Indonesians' record in 1 year. For additional perspective, between 1991 to 2002, Indonesia drilled 1,081 wells, Vietnam 154 wells, Malaysia 956 wells, and the Philippines less than 20 wells. Immediately after my session, I will be off to a meeting convened by our Energy and Power Committee to discuss issue on our energy and power sectors with the Department of Energy. This will be the third since February when we started holding talks with stakeholders and our regulators. Second on our list is promoting agriculture efficiency. Globally, while the outlook of food supplies remain positive, food prices are near all high due to elevated input prices. The situation combined with high transport costs are raising import prices. At the domestic front, the issues is compounded by supply side price pressure and low productivity. In one of our meetings with our agricultural committee, one of the factors identified as the cause in food prices increasing is the upsurge of price in fertilizer, in particularly urea, and the feed supplement. Livestock and poultry sectors are experiencing high corn and soybean costs. Again, this conflict is likely to exacerbate food price inflation. Aside from being a major supplier of oil, Russia is integrated into the global agriculture as a supply of inputs, particularly fertilizer, corn, and soybean. At this point, even easing the import restriction would not be able to stem rising food prices. We should seriously set the goals of developing our agriculture and fishery sector to ensure self-sufficiency and at the same time sustain our livelihood of families and communities in rural areas while bringing development to the countryside. These sectors have been neglected for the longest time, yet we all know that they are the source of raw material for the country's food industry. Among our proposal to raise productivity levels to achieve food security include addressing supply chain gaps through the distribution of downstream processing activities infrastructure support, input subsidies, and access to research and development and technology. Third is addressing the cost and the slow movement of goods at the port. At the height of the pandemic and even till today, our ports continue to be congested. Slow processing time have contributed to logjams where ships and cargoes are not immediately cleared, causing supply chain disruption, stock shortages, delays in deliveries, even canceled orders and loss of suppliers and buyers. There are not enough container yards to accommodate overstaying ships that are either waiting for clearance by either the Bureau of Customs or the Philippine Port Authority. For the longest time now, our port infrastructure system has been overwhelmed, caused both by regulatory inefficiencies, especially in Manila ports, and poor infrastructure of those outside Metro Manila. The Build project, although it's good, has been too focused on the roads, rails, and airport projects, but have neglected shipping ports, which are basically the lungs of the country's trade and commerce. Last week, I had a good meeting with the new officers of our Transport and Logistics Committee and with the Energy and Power and Agriculture and Food Security Committee. The standing order is for us to craft a game plan to help bring about a more efficient transport sector. This sector, as you may appreciate, is vital to the inputs of productivity given our archipelagic layout. I will end my brief statements by sharing with you the acronym which we plan to pursue with the new administration, which is basically to reach out. The acronym reach out, there are, I believe, 5 letters, REACH. And each letter means something. The first word, R, we have to reinvigorate our resources, natural resources, oil, mineral, and water. And the second letter, E, is education and energy. And the third letter, C, is connectivity by land, by sea, by air, and most importantly, the digital, and also the climate change resiliency. And H, the last letter of reach is human skills and human dignity. And with that, reach out, the out is one united in transformation and transparency. So those are the key points that we hope that the new administration can seriously look into to promote our economic growth and welfare of our Filipinos. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Mr. Barcelon, for giving us that business perspective, which is part of the part 2 of our program. But thank you for already giving us an insight on part 2. And for now, we'll have to go back to the last segment of part 1 on policy recommendations for the next administration. And to talk about issues for the next administration's development agenda on human capital and labor markets, we have Dr. Vicente Paqueo. Again, Mr. or Dr. Paqueo is a distinguished visiting fellow at the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. He previously served as professor at the University of the Philippines School of Economics and lead economist for the World Bank. He also served as a consultant to various local and international organizations, such as the International Labor Organization and the World Health Organization. Dr. Paqueo.
Thank you, Karen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yes. Can you alert me when I am 8 minutes past?
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Mike Abrigo and I just completed a paper for a stat-based ADR Institute titled Issues for the Next Administration's Development Agenda on Human Capital and Labor Markets. My remarks will highlight key ideas of the paper that are relevant to the theme of today's table discussion. A critical issue facing the next administration is the long-standing challenge of how to meet people's demand for jobs that A, pay enough for them to be able to live comfortably, and that B, provide workers employment/income security. Recognizing those challenges, the paper argues that the next administration should include in its development agenda the achievement of rapid and sustained labor productivity growth. The paper further argues that this strategic objective can be accomplished to a large extent in the long run through A, better education and training, and B, modernization of the labor markets to strengthen the ability of the labor markets to function efficiently. This proposal, which should be of interest to business, labor, and government, is grounded on the following facts. High and sustained productivity growth is central to modern economic growth and development. As Nobel laureate Paul Krugman quipped, quote, "Productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it is almost everything." The Philippines has been lagging behind its regional and aspirational peers in growing labor productivity, indicating substantial room for potential improvements. Philippine data also indicate that the high worker productivity productivity growth leads to expansion of jobs and higher compensation per worker in line with international experience. Contrary to claims that workers share little, if any, of the gains from productivity improvements, if any, compensation per worker in the Philippines tend to rise proportionately with GDP per capita or per worker, a measure of worker productivity. Reliance on employment protection laws, such as the imposition of higher minimum wages, strict security of tenure laws, and restrictions on work outsourcing and temporary employment, has important limitations. In particular, injudicious and overuse of these tools can be damaging to the employment prospects of disadvantaged groups like the young, less educated, inexperienced, and in general, those with lower human capital. These concerns are supported by empirical studies showing that, on the whole, increases in legal minimum wages adversely impact employment in the Philippines, except for large enterprises. They are further supported by the World Bank study showing that the country's labor regulatory environment has put the Philippines at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis other competitor countries. It is important to improve the ability of workers and employers to adjust opportunely to changes in the business environment to maximize benefits from advances in knowledge and technology. Those changes refer to the disruptions that advances in AI-driven automation and other new technologies will bring about. As the fourth industrial revolution unfolds, more new jobs will be created while old jobs will be destroyed or reconfigured. those disruptions are expected to become part of a new normal that will necessitate workers to move more often from old to new or reconfigured jobs. In regard to education and training, these are arguably necessary tools for achieving sustained productivity growth and to boot inclusivity if done right, especially in light of the knowledge-driven Fourth Industrial Revolution. Hence, it is critical for the new administration to include a robust agenda for education and skills development, especially in regard basic education and enterprise-based training. Empirical findings, unfortunately, indicate that the country's current and future workforce, particularly those from socially and economically disadvantaged families, are not getting the competencies needed to take advantage of current and emerging innovations and economic opportunities that advances in science and technology are bringing about. In this regard, data shows that only 2% of children achieve a learning proficiency level that meets fully minimum international standards. Only about 20% are classified as near proficiency levels. That also indicates that despite increased education spending and the many education reforms undertaken, the average national achievement test scores of children appear to be generally stagnant over the years. We appear to be in low equilibrium status in the past decades. Moreover, data reveal that only about 3% of training outputs in the Philippines is produced by enterprise-based training, compared to about 15% or more among aspirational peers. Further along, workers in the Philippines predominantly do not have access to affordable, high-quality, lifelong learning opportunities. For the modernization of the labor code to happen, our paper argues that the new administration must take measures to assure that the new administration must take measures to assure that workers will get a fair share of the benefits from labor productivity improvements.
Dr. Vic, it's already 9:58, just as an FYI.
Sorry?
It's already 9:58 a.m. as you requested, 8 minutes into your presentation.
Right. So the paper further points out that the relaxing job tenures rules, hiring temporary workers, etc. The reforms of these rules might have to be bought at the price of a stronger unemployment insurance system. Workers further want access to affordable, good quality lifelong learning centers to acquire the competencies necessary to qualify for better alternative jobs. Part of the administration agendas, therefore, would be for the government to convene and sit down with the leaders of organized labor and employers to hammer through give and take tripartite deal or social contract that would be a win-win for businesses and workers. Such contract should include a package of actionable measures that will raise the productivity and competencies of workers through good quality education and training, facilitate business investment in innovations and accumulation of physical capital, domestic and foreign, and undertake timely construction of needed public infrastructures, modernization of the labor code, and strengthening of the unemployment insurance system. Those measures should improve the viability and profitability of new and existing enterprises needed to support faster expansion of jobs, sustained rise of labor wages and benefits, and better income security for workers. The strategy underlying the above approach is to implement a combination of measures that will make the economy so dynamic and efficient that there will be plenty of well-paying jobs to choose from. And with a good unemployment insurance system and other social safety nets, the economic security issue become manageable. To conclude, let me mention that our papers provide a list of specific and practical suggestions that you might want to look into in formulating your business sector agenda for the next administration. Let me just ask maybe Christine to just show the tables or boxes that list the various suggestions for inclusion or for consideration of the new administration in regard to specific measures to achieve the objectives laid out by the paper. So in this box, it talks about, it has the elements of what the social contract for the modernization of the labor code of the Philippines would look like. And it calls for a review of the systematic review of the labor code and to be led by a task force that may be deemed like a commission to do the review of the and make recommendations for the modernization of the labor code of the Philippines. Can you raise it a little higher? The next box, please. Next box. Okay. This is the box 6 in the paper, which lists the options for improving workers' skill set and ability to get new or better jobs. Here, we are proposing that the expansion of enterprise-based training for would aim for a 3% to up to 50% share of training outputs in the Philippines. Enterprise-based training produces, I think, the best and relevant training outputs. Then revision of the apprenticeship law, job start law, etc. And expansion of the use of vouchers to support enterprise-based training and improve access to lifelong learning for skills upgrading and acquisition of new competencies. The next box, please. Yes, and then you have this long list here, the box 5, list of proposals of the next administration's development agenda for education. Let me just mention a couple. One is we need to recalibrate the government focus from massification of low-quality education, which has been the past pursuit, to raising student learning achievement or improvement in the quality of education. The second part calls for an increase in investment in education up to 5% from about 3.5%. We have been underinvested.
I think we have to wrap up because we're already 5 minutes over time from the time allotted.
Okay, and then just one last sentence. And here we also propose that the private sector in education should be given a fair chance. It has been marginalized, and I think that it is inefficient to unintentionally pursue policies that have that effect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vic Paqueo. That was, I wish we had more time because you have very great concrete suggestions for policies on human capital and labor market. So thank you very much. Perhaps later you can address more of that in the question and answer portion of our forum. And now we'll move to part 2 of our program, which is on business perspective. Earlier, we saw a glimpse of that from Mr. George Barcelon, but now we'll properly go into that part where we will hear from respected members of the business community about the importance of public-private cooperation in achieving national goals. Speakers for this part will draw on their depth of experience to suggest which policies they would like to see from the new government. A range of voices across the business spectrum will be heard, allowing for a balanced, diverse set of views. Earlier, we heard Mr. George Barcelon talk about public-private sector collaboration for immediate business recovery. And to talk about parallels between good management and good governance, we have Mr. Alfredo Pascual. Mr. Pascual is the president of the Management Association of the Philippines, and over the past 4 decades, he has contributed to society as a governance advocate, academic leader, international development banker, and management educator. He previously served as president at the University of the Philippines system. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Pascual.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everyone. Public governance and corporate governance are very similar. In both cases, it's about bodies of people who work together to accomplish a task. In parliamentary democracies, the national government is supervised by the parliament. The members of the parliament are elected by the people, the electorate, and the parliament chooses the head of the government from among its members. So the parliament is very much like the board of directors of a company, whose members are elected by the stockholders. And the ministers in parliamentary government are like the executive directors. We hear that some Philippine presidential candidates will consider a parliamentary form of government for the country. Let's see. In the Philippines, we have a presidential setup. The chief executive is elected directly by the voters, and Congress, whose members are also elected by the people, provides the check and balance to a certain degree, not fully. I will not discuss the merits or the relative merits of the two forms of government, but civil servants are the ones tasked with the implementation in both cases. To be sure, public governance and corporate governance are not exactly the same. The government must follow the rule of law in all its operations. In the business community, powers can be employed on commercial and discretionary premises, but of course within the limits set by the company law and other pertinent statutes, as well as private contractual arrangements binding the business. Other differences exist. The government must always follow the general principles of good administration, which are basic decency guidelines to protect citizens against an all-powerful government. It is a bit different in business, and the leading principle of decency is reasonableness and fairness. At the crossroads of public and private governance are the government-owned and controlled corporations and the national government agencies. At these crossroads, we see GOCCs and NGAs that are adopting the usual management and governance principles and practices followed by the private corporations. You are familiar with the Institute of Corporate Directors, an advocate of good corporate governance, and the Institute for Solidarity in Asia, an advocate of good public governance. ICD and ISA are both non-stock, non-profit corporations, which are closely related to each other by provenance. As you know, ICD provides governance training and related services to private and public corporations. On the other hand, ISA guides the transformation of NGAs and local government units based on the performance governance system, which is effectively the balanced scorecard adapted to Philippine circumstances. ISA has a good track record of working with NGAs and LGUs implementing the PGS, or Performance Governance System. For example, and this is what I will give you, an overview of the experience of a government agency that a panel of lawmakers earlier proposed to abolish because of endemic corruption. In the February 27 presidential debate hosted by CNN Philippines, 8 out of 9 presidential candidates wanted to investigate this agency if they won the presidency. I'm referring, of course, to no other than the Bureau of Customs, an agency that affects the business sector to a great extent, particularly those engaged in exports and imports. The BOC decided to tread the governance pathway and began to adopt the PGS 3 years ago through a partnership with ISA. As I've said earlier, PGS is the local adaptation of the balanced scorecard developed at the Harvard Business School. It is a performance management and measurement tool that aims to translate organizational goals into breakthrough results guided by a set of performance indicators and matrices as practiced in the private corporate world. Dr. Jess Stanislao, founder and chairman emeritus of ISA, has served as chair of the Multi-Sector Governance Council of the Bureau of Customs since 2019. According to his report, BOC has made significant difference as it sought to transform itself within a very short period of 3 years. Its visionary leadership, led by Commissioner Ray Leonardo Guerrero, has given its total commitment and unstinting efforts to formulating and executing a transformation roadmap. The Bureau has a clear vision about its transformation from one of the most corrupt agencies in our public sector to one that can aspire to be counted among customs administrations adhering to global best practices. What used to be a very corrupt agency is now rated by its immediate stakeholders, that is, the importers and exporters, with more than 90% approval rating. The Bureau pursued a defined game-changing strategic priority, that is a decisive shift from mainly manual operations to automated processes, from internal procedures requiring far too many signatures of officials who had to personally intervene to grease the internal value chain, to eventually clear and release goods, to automated processes. As of the end of 2021, last year, BOC achieved automation of 82%, 139 out of 170 of the customs processes. Indeed, digitalization is one of the most important aspects of good governance. It involves the employment of digital technology to facilitate efficient and instant transmission and processing of information, as well as storing and retrieval of data. Thus, digitalization helps implement core values of good governance, such as transparency, effectiveness, accountability, and participation of citizens in the case of the public sector. Digitalization can disrupt corruption, as BOC proved. We have all witnessed how the ongoing pandemic has accelerated the implementation of digital solutions or technology solutions like digital transformation. This is very apparent in the business sector. In BOC, the process digitalization has been challenging to its personnel, from the top down to the last employee. Everyone had to do their share, everyone had clear performance targets, and everyone had to deliver outcomes. Moreover, the delivery of those outcomes was tracked regularly and became the basis of a more meritocratic personal and team performance assessment. Customer care portal, through which the needs of the transacting public could be met with professionalism, courtesy, and a spirit of service, soon spread in a specific initiative of BOC. So did ISO certification, from only one port being ISO certified before the transformation program to virtually all ports and key offices obtaining the same status by this time in 2022. The Bureau sought the help of its restructuring initiative. It grew more proactive in using social media to notify the public about its advances. It sought out internal stakeholders to help improve the Bureau's service quality. It developed a multi-sector governance council in every collection port to receive local input from external parties. It collaborated with other government agencies to improve public service, such as developing a single national portal for trade facilitation. With the help of the World Bank, it has now chosen to support a multi-year customs modernization program. These actions have been undertaken with many obstacles thrown in the way of BOC's transformation. Fortunately, BOC has been able to count on solid support from those governance advocates who have witnessed the gains and the initial transformative outcomes of the BOC has delivered. While we praise the Bureau of Customs for the transformative outcome at its initial stages, of course, we also hope that it can sustain its transformation effort. That is, until 2025, when the World Bank-supported modernization program will be completed, and beyond 2025, when the transformation processes and practices will eventually and hopefully virtually irreversible. On March 17, MAP, Phoenix, and MBC will hold a joint meeting to allow a presentation by BOC Commissioner Guerrero about the Bureau's Transformation Sustainability Program. You are all welcome to attend this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pascual, and thank you for that invitation for the MAPS forum. I hope you can really share the details of that so that we can all attend it. And later, maybe during the question and answer portion, you can also give more details on that. But thank you for your insights, and specifically with the Bureau of Customs, which was very relevant in the Indian Philippines debate when I think almost all, except for one presidential candidate, like practically all the presidential candidates said that that was the most corrupt agency that would need reform that they would start a reform on if they were to win as president. Now we'll move on to talk about reforms for employment generation. And to discuss this would be Mr. Sergio Ortiz Luis Jr. Mr. Ortiz Luis is the president of the Employers Confederation of the Philippines. He is also director and treasurer of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry and president of the Philippine Exporters Confederation, Incorporated. Mr. Ortiz Luis, you have the floor.
Professor Victor Andres Dido Manhit of the Strat-based ADRi Institute, Mr. Ernest Bauer IV of the Bauer Group Asia, former Deputy Governor of BSP, Mr. Diwa Ginigundo, Dr. Vicente Paqueo of the Strat-based Institute and Philippine Institute for Development Studies, my friend George Barcelon, President of Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Alfredo Pascual of the Management Association of the Philippines, Mr. Edgar Chua of the Makati Business Club, Ms. Sharon Dayawan of the Filipina CEO Circle, and of course, Attorney Karen Jimeno of the Soft Cap Partners, guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for another opportunity to address this esteemed gathering of industry and business leaders that have a major influence in shaping our near to long-term future. We are approaching a critical crossroad in our history as a country and as a people as we anticipate the May elections. I know that I need not dwell on the details of some of the political circus that have been hugging the center stage, whether we like it or not. We're all aware of these developments thanks to technology and with so many of us involved in actually trying to influence the result of this election. 6 years is too long for a bad administration and too short for a good one. This is the stake, and we are all hanging on a thread in suspense, noting that anything can happen from this point. In the meantime, we have businesses to revive and sustain, employees to provide salaries to, and an economy to nourish to progress. In contrast to the political ecosystem, we are all in the long haul. Unfortunately, we will be left picking up the pieces if we choose wrongly. Thus, as far as business is concerned, we had been a willing government partner in addressing the ill effects and disruptions brought about by COVID-19, not only on the economy, but on the lives of our people. Entering Alert Level 1 was much awaited, complementing our common drive to set up immunities in our bodies, health, and economic system. The next months will be a critical test if we were efficient and effective in achieving these objectives to stay on track with our recovery targets. Some major impetus, the national elections are a timely boost now that we have loosened up our protocols. We expect election spending to lead and create positive economic ripples, including the creation of livelihood and jobs, even if in some cases this may just be temporary. Aligned with the overall goal to rebuild the economy better, ECO for One, and together with various organizations and government partners in the National Economic Recovery Strategy, pledged in June 2021 to create 1 million direct and indirect jobs for the rest of the year by immediately sourcing Filipino talents for deployment in the construction, manufacturing, particularly semiconductor and electronics, tourism, and hospitality and export industries under the Reform, Rebound, Recover 1 million jobs for 2021 project. Although the project fell short of its 2021 targets due to mobility restrictions on goods and people, the partnership will continue this year with a strong resolve now that conditions are much better. Employers may be directly responsible to create jobs, but the whole of government approach in facilitating this to happen cannot be overemphasized. Business efficiency and productivity also rest on ensuring that regulatory and policy environment is conducive. Towards this objective, we laud the Anti-Red Tape Authority or ARTA, which has been working closely with the agencies involved to eliminate unnecessary documents and steps. For employers, this includes those that are needed to open, close and expand operations, and hire or engage people. One-stop centers are business-friendly, set up that can facilitate streamlining of procedures if the agencies are not ready to fully computerize yet. Further, as we resume 100% operations and as pandemic lessons, we remain vigilant by continuing to implement health and safety protocols in the workplace and encouraging unvaccinated workers and their families to comply. Vaccination also echoes one of the objectives of the 1 million job. It is likewise a part of the action points that will make for a successful business continuity or BCP in the context of disruptions such as this pandemic. With this in mind, ECOP is participating as a member of a Trade Department-led core group that will help ensure that BCPs are developed and institutionalized at the enterprise level. This program also gets strong technical and logistic support from the International Labor Organization, or ILO. Meanwhile, ECOP is also into the advocacy and program implementation of the Operational Safety and Health, or OS, and Diversity and Inclusion, DNI. Through OS and DNI policies, we promote and create a workplace that motivates employees to work peacefully, happily, and productively. Putting in place OS policies ensures the safety of workers from health hazard, while DNI policies open more opportunities for the company, organization for equality and empowerment to assist businesses, especially MSMEs, to comply. ECOP actively conducts training focused on capacitating employees to install OS policies and programs in the workplace. Workshops are also being conducted to increase the awareness of business leaders and spark inspiration among employees to support and observe workplace DNI in ways possible. All this contribute to setting the stage to boost consumer and business confidence critical towards our economic recovery. People will be more at ease to go out knowing that it is safe to take place public transportation and mingle with their colleagues at work with very little risk of contracting the virus. As a final point on the matter of impetus, it is worthwhile noting that we have been enjoying at least 3 years of relatively industrial peace, where employers and labor groups are able to sit together in meetings with the mindset of arriving at win-win solutions. I would like to partly attribute this to the ECO program we call Leaders Forum, where the major business and labor organizations are represented in regular discussions of issues. Finally, it has sunk in that we are not adversaries but partners to achieve progress. We intend to maintain this harmonious working relationship that is mutually favorable. Transporting jobs, meanwhile, there is another pandemic lesson that we need to take seriously. Beyond creating and saving jobs is the call to transform jobs that are becoming obsolete as we continue to adopt technological improvements for our businesses. With more and more workers threatened by the risk of being displaced due to redundancy and obsolete functions, it is imperative to be aware of and learn new skills, 21st century skills, so that companies and employees remain relevant, adaptive, and thriving in this ever-changing work environment. Shaping and transforming jobs needs investment in education and skills development. Equipping graduates, new hires, and employees with the right skills and competencies that will continue to be relevant is a game changer in ensuring retention, productivity, efficiency, and competitiveness. COVID-19 has indeed accelerated the transition to the new economy and creation of new jobs where technology fuels growth and innovation. The fast-paced society that we live in, combined with the disruptions brought by the pandemic and other uncontrollable external factors, has ushered in technological breakthroughs that aim to respond to evolving changes. This also covers the area of learning and skills training and upgrading that is key to empowering our workforce amidst threat that they might be replaced by artificial intelligence, robots, and machines. How urgent is this transformation? This year, the World Economic Forum estimates that 133 million new jobs in major economies will be created to meet the demand of the fourth industrial revolution. In the Philippines, the International Labor Organization projects that 49% of employment, equivalent to over 18 million jobs, face the risk of automation. And this is where the importance of soft skills development comes in. ECOP's
Sir
involvement
Ortiz,
in
Luis,
this
sorry,
event.
we have if we can wrap up because of the limited time we have two speakers left. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Facilitate for the workforce in this area, we are partners with business organizations such as the Philippine Contractor Association, the Philippine Hotels Organization, apart from the changes posed by automation and displacement of workers. So that is an exhaustive list that would give to the next president. Admittedly, he or she is facing the toughest jobs on which we are all either happy beneficiaries or unfortunate victims and casualties. But in the area of job creation, these are short to medium term priorities that can be built on continuously. You can count on ECOP to remain steadfast in working with other agents or positive change in pushing the common agenda of improving improving the lives of our people and building a competitive nation within and beyond the incoming administration. Maraming salamat po at magandang umaga sa ating lahat.
Thank you, Mr. Serio. I hope we can address the rest of your points during the question and answer portion of our forum. Thank you. And now to discuss the private sector's role in strengthening democratic institutions and liberalizing the economy, we have Mr. Edgar Chua. Mr. Chua is the chairman of the Makati Business Club. He has had many years of experience in the petroleum business as the former country chairman of Shell companies in the Philippines. He is a recipient of numerous local and international recognitions, including Asia People of the Year 2013 and Map Management Man of the Year 2013, among others. Thank you. And Mr. Chua?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. Good morning to all the distinguished guests and fellow panelists. The private sector has always played an extensive role in advocating for the further liberalization of the Philippine economy. With globalization, there is no alternative but to open up the economy to create more jobs for Filipinos, lower costs for consumers, encourage technology transfer, and improve the competitiveness of the Philippine economy. MBC has been at the forefront of a number of initiatives, such as the National Competitiveness Commission, the APEC Business Advisory Council of the Philippines, the Philippine Services Coalition, and since 2005, MBC has been the World Economic Forum's Philippine partner in its Global Competitiveness Survey and report, as well as other projects. Most recently, Philippine lawmakers passed key economic reforms with significant participation in the private sector. MBC, like other business groups, has been active in these advocacy efforts And June Ortiz-Luis has mentioned some of them, like the Public Service Act, Foreign Investment Act, the tax reforms such as corporate recovery and tax incentives for enterprises or create. There's also been the rice tarification law, which abolished the NFA importation monopoly on rice. Amendments to the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, reducing the minimum capital requirement for foreign investors from $2.5 million to $500,000. And the Ease of Doing Business and Efficient Government Service Delivery Act of 2018. MBC is currently preparing infrastructure and economic blueprints, which will contain actionable recommendations that will be presented to the new administration. The infrastructure and economic blueprints are also meant to promote public-private partnership initiatives. PPP initiatives was, as mentioned by other panelists, help fill in the government's funding or technical gaps, which can allow government to focus on more pressing priorities. The economic blueprint that MBC is preparing will be focused on how the Philippine economy can recover and grow through job creation. The infrastructure blueprint will be focused on the pain points faced by infra players, as well as actionable recommendations covering the rules that are currently in place. The recommendations for both blueprints will be based on discussions with and survey of industry players. On the private sector's role in strengthening democratic institutions, while all business organizations are supportive of strengthening democratic institutions and see this as an integral part to ensuring a level playing field and promoting economic growth, not many are prepared to make public statements or undertake initiatives that may be interpreted as political or critical of the administration or any given administration, even if the focus is on issues and not personalities. Since 1981, MBC has been at the forefront of economic and social advocacy by the business sector. We oppose crony capitalism and was very active in various initiatives that led to the return of democracy in 1986. MBC has also run, organized, or helped organize the Coalition Against Corruption, Project Shine, and the successor Integrity Initiative, the Right to Know Coalition, which our Freedom of Information Project continues to work with. For example, on the freedom of information, we are working on initiatives to curb corruption and increase accountability by granting citizens and businesses access to public data. MBC has partnered with the Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE, on a project that aims to build the demand for the passage of the FOI law. And a number of initiatives or engagement activities has been undertaken, like roundtable discussions and workshops with key stakeholders, including legislators, civil society, business groups, and the youth. Joint position paper signed by 20 business organizations calling for the passage of the FOI law was released and submitted to the Senate and Congress. We believe that in part because of our efforts, the House Committee on Public Information convened in 2021 to create a technical working group that will consolidate enrolled FOI bills, the first since 2017. MBC is the representative of the business sector, and the consolidated bill is now pending approval of the committee. MBC has also joined the call for candidates to make their SALN public. FOI Media Forum was held to encourage Filipinos to select leaders who commit to the passage of the FOI in their administration. On digital democracy, the project aims to strengthen democracy and governance by introducing the use of online tools to expand and strengthen public consultation. These tools are meant to help local governments use technology to help get citizen participation, to craft policies with popular support. The project has been piloted in Pasig, Iligan, and Legazpi, as well as Intramuros. MBC is also supporting responsible ad placements by companies. We have partnered with Internews, an international media and information NGO, and the Asian Center for Journalism for Ad for News. This is a counter-disinformation project that aims to support local quality journalism while benefiting brands and businesses. The Asian Center for Journalism at Ateneo de Manila has created a positive list of trusted media, meaning media companies that take steps to block disinformation, and is seeking to encourage advertisers like yourselves to shift more ad spend there. Over time, We believe this will strengthen such media platforms and incentivize other platforms to address disinformation more seriously, with beneficial effects for our society. Research suggests that ads seen on non-toxic trusted media platforms are 53% more trusted than ads seen on social platforms, 50% more likely to engage your target consumer and increase consumer preference or confidence in your brand or product by 85%. Some people ask, why do we need democratic institutions when some countries like China and Vietnam are doing very well economically when they do not have democratic institutions? This is a good question, and it is true. But their form of government is different from our form of government. We follow the US, UK, South Korea, who have democratic forms of government. They are economically successful because they have strong institutions. And so we must look at strengthening our own democratic institutions. MBC is committed to provide the business sector constructive ideas and a global outlook, and a vehicle for them to help build a competitive, job-creating economy and a democratic, inclusive, and sustainable society. This is MBC's mission and purpose. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chua. And I hope to see you also at the question and answer, which is coming very shortly. And last but not the least, and I think it's appropriate that we're ending our speakers part with a female because it's Women's Month. And to talk about promoting women in business is Ms. Sharon Dayoan. Ms. Sharon Dayoan is the president and co-founder of the Filipina CEO Circle, or FCC. This is an organization committed to encouraging Filipinas in the workplace to achieve their career aspirations and pursue their ambitions to lead. It's my honor to introduce to you Ms. Sharon Dayoan.
Thanks to Strat-based ADRi Institute and Bauer Group Asia for inviting me to speak in this event. As the May elections draw near and a new set of elected officials will soon take over the country's leadership, I appreciate the efforts of the organizers of this event in highlighting the importance of the engagement of the government with the business community, where the business community can provide feedback from our on-the-ground experiences and share our insights on what we can do to help our country grow. The past couple of years have been tough for our economy, our businesses, and our personal lives. As business leaders, we not only had to contend with the devastating impact of the lockdowns and the pandemic on our operations, but we also had to ensure that the people depending on us for their livelihood were taken care of. Many of us had to quickly implement changes in our operations to ensure the health and safety of our employees, suppliers, partners, and customers. It was overwhelming, especially in the beginning, but the collective response that the Philippine business community showed during the pandemic truly embodied our bayanihan spirit. I am proud to say that the Filipina CEO Circle, the business organization I belong to, together with other strong Filipina business leaders, played its part in helping the government with its pandemic response. We mounted and organized fundraising activities for healthcare workers, procured personnel protective equipment and medical supplies at a time when supply was very limited due to the extraordinarily high demand, and purchased the much-needed vaccines for our employees. With this pandemic, we have proven that we are resilient and capable of adapting. The private sector has demonstrated that it is willing and able to take action and make the necessary changes to ensure survival and even growth amidst difficult times. As we emerge from the pandemic and shift from crisis survival mode to crisis risk management, we must now focus on the economic recovery and growth of our country. So the Philippine GDP in 2020 was negative 9.6%, and this improved significantly in 2021 at 5.6%. But we do have to be mindful that the 2021 GDP is compared to a much lower base. And I am certain that we all agree that there is a lot of work that must be done as we try to get our economy back on track. The business community is here, willing to work hand in hand with the government to come up and execute a robust and practicable business agenda that should be inclusive and sustainable. Allow me now to share some of my thoughts on some key areas that the new administration must include in its business agenda. First is to implement a strong social safety net so that those that are the most disenfranchised and most vulnerable in our country are supported and helped. Poverty is a very real issue for a lot of our kababayans. According to a survey by the social weather stations late last year, around 2.5 million Filipino families experienced hunger. Of this figure, around 2 million families experienced moderate hunger, skipping at least one meal a day, while the remaining 500,000 families experienced severe hunger, having to go without food for more than one day. And there are other studies that show much dire statistics. This lack of food, the most basic of human rights, has far-reaching impact and consequences in our society. It affects a child's physical, emotional, and mental development. It has been proven that malnourished children have poorer learning aptitude. So did you know that in terms of IQ, the Philippines rank 111th out of 199 countries with an average IQ of 81.7, compared to Japan, who is ranked first with an average IQ of 106.48. So these issues on poverty naturally bring to fore issues on education. According to Education Advisory Group Philippine Business for Education, for children under 5 years old, 1 out of 3 are stunted and 1 out of 5 are underweight. They estimate that 1.1 million students did not go to school last year, with 1 out of 4 kinder-aged children not in formal schooling. This education crisis was also exacerbated by the pandemic and the necessity to shift to online learning. Without access to the internet and tools such as tablets and computers, the learning gap of children from impoverished households further widened. In addition, there are very real concerns regarding the home-based and online learning setup. In a World Bank and Australian aid research paper published last year, it found that parents and students were not satisfied with the current home-based and virtual learning education setup in the Philippines. Barriers such as stress due to the pandemic, lack of access to gadgets, and inability of children to focus were some of the reasons cited as why the current environment is not conducive to learning. Unless urgent policy measures and programs are introduced to address the loss of learning brought on by the pandemic, there will be a human capital crisis that will undermine future productivity and impact the country's long-term competitiveness. These are very concerning issues with serious long-term consequences. We know that our economic growth lies with our people. We pride ourselves in having a globally competitive workforce. But if we do not take care of the next generation, then we will miss out on taking full advantage of the benefits of the demographic sweet spot that comes from having a young population. This is why it is important that social welfare, healthcare, education, and other social safety nets be made available to those in need by a government that works for its people without corruption and dishonesty. Second, the new administration needs to make the Philippines as an attractive investment destination to encourage more foreign direct investments in the country that will boost our economy by creating more jobs and foster the transfer of skills and technology. A step in the right direction was taken just last week when President Duterte signed into law Republic Act number 11647, an act promoting foreign direct investments that removes several restrictions on foreign investments. This aims to make the Philippines a more attractive destination for FDIs and reform the Philippines from being one of the most restrictive in Asia and the world in terms of foreign investments. In line with attracting more foreign investments, we must continue to have strong macroeconomic fundamentals and a stable regulatory environment. The new administration must implement programs to make doing business in the Philippines easier. It is concerning that in the latest global competitiveness ranking, the Philippines ranked 52nd out of 64 countries. In the Asia Pacific countries covered by the 2021 report, we were 13th out of 14 economies, only staying ahead of Mongolia. This must be addressed by the incoming administration. Third, the new administration must continue investing in infrastructure. There's no need to discuss here the benefits of investing in infrastructure. One thing that I want to note, though, is the priority that the government must place in upgrading our IT infrastructure. Spotty connection and slow internet speed notwithstanding, our digital infrastructure is still concentrated in urban areas, where rural areas and poorer communities have to contend with insufficient or lack of access to the internet. This unequal access has created a digital divide, making productivity a privilege, where those without sufficient access are left behind, losing out on opportunities from basic amenities and quality education to decent work and reskilling. Digital poverty may be a new concept for some, but as with any area where there is inequity, the government must prioritize policies and programs to bridge the gap. An equitable access to high-quality internet must be in the new administration's agenda, given that in a 2020 report published by the World Bank and NEDA, the use of digital technologies such as digital payments, e-commerce, telemedicine, and online education are rising in the Philippines, helping individuals, businesses, and the government deal with the consequences of the pandemic. We saw this with the rise in e-commerce adoption in the country, especially because the lockdowns have limited economic activity and physical movement, forcing a lot of existing and new businesses to offer their goods and services online. Hand in hand with e-commerce was the rise of digital payments and fintech, with around 48% of the Philippines' adult population still unbanked as of 2020. These platforms provide a convenient and efficient way to transact with businesses and with individuals. We must not lose the gains we had on technology and innovation when we responded to the pandemic. Instead, we must take advantage of this momentum and invest in its development and advancement and make it accessible to all. There are many things that we have to work on to ensure inclusive economic recovery and growth. I already mentioned the need to address poverty, lack of food security, and education gaps, the importance of FDIs and in improving our competitiveness, and the need to invest in infrastructure and technology. There are many more business agenda items to talk about. There is the importance of ESG, addressing climate change, inclusivity, and social injustice. I'm sure that the other speakers in this forum will cover many of these. Indeed, the new administration has its work cut out for them. But as I said earlier, the business community is here, very eager to work with the government to build back our economy and our nation. 2022 is a consequential year for all of us. My sincerest hope is that we elect leaders that will truly serve our people and have our nation's best interests at heart. We have gone through so much with the pandemic, and we need capable leaders to guide our country as we navigate a post-pandemic world. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.
Thank you, Ms. Dayon. And I think that really sums up all the speakers' points very well, that really the private sector is here to help and work with the government. And we've seen that happen during the pandemic. And now we will go to the open forum where the audience will have the ability to ask questions from our speakers, and at least we can have the speakers expound more on the points that they talked about earlier. Let's see. Well, just for all our audience to know, Mr. Edgar Chua is leaving by 11 a.m. So if you have questions for him, please raise that right away before he leaves. Mr. Edgar Chua talked about the private sector's role in strengthening democratic institutions and liberalizing the economy. So if you have any questions, anyone, you may please write it down in the chat forum. Okay. We have questions here that were sent earlier by some members of the audience. So we'll start off with this question. How would you assess the government's initiatives in promoting multi-sectoral collaboration, especially with the private sector? And are these efforts adequate? Any of our speakers may address this question.
I'll try to take a stab, Karen.
Yes.
It's unfortunate that George Barcelon is not here anymore because he's the business sector representative at the LEDAC. And I think the LEDAC has not been convened as often as it should have been. In the IATF, I would say that the business sector also has not been a party to the IATF, although there's been attempts like T3 and Joy Concepcion bringing in the private sector. I would say that there is a lot of room for improvement in trying to engage the business sector, getting its inputs, no? Because maybe we could have had granular lockdowns earlier, or we could have had a more maybe tempered approach rather than a sort of a militaristic approach, no? In terms of an oversimplification, like it's a one size fits all. I think that's where the private sector inputs could have helped craft maybe more coherent and effective policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chua. Anyone else from our speakers that would like to add to that answer?
May I just add that what we have been asking for from the very start is in trade negotiations, the private sector is hardly represented. Many times we just hear what is the result of the negotiation. We're not party to it. Sometimes they allow us to be there, but not able to put our input exactly, just observers. I think that leaves a lot of room, especially now that we're going to do a lot of negotiations and a lot of foreign trade negotiations that will be going on.
Thank you, Mr. Jun. I think that's a very good insight and very good observation. Anyone else? Okay. We have another question from our audience, and this talks about, this asks our speakers, as members of the business community, what is one specific area of legislation that would most effectively enable you to create jobs? And I remember one of our speakers had like a very extensive presentation on job creation. I think Dr. Vic also had like specific recommendations on this. Dr. Vic? Oh, sorry. Dr. Vic, you're on mute.
The question is about the single most important measure or initiative?
Or specific area of legislation to effectively enable job creation?
I think I proposed, the modernization of the labor code of the Philippines. I think it's outdated and must be, and a lot of the provisions there could be improved upon and liberalized so that the cost of employing people, hiring people, sort of redeploying people will be lower and less of a burden, and in effect encourage the ability to adopt innovations and in effect create jobs and encourage more labor intensive in the medium run labor intensive processes, programs. That's one. How to do that? I think that there should be the government, the new government should convene and sit down with both labor organizations and the employers to talk about finding win-win solutions so that you're able to develop a more rational regulatory environment in the Philippines. It's not going to be easy, but I think we have to do it.
I completely agree with what was said regarding we have to really update our labor laws. But just an opposite of what's legislation, every year, ECOP tries to fight about 100, more than 100 bills that are filed and refiled and we try to, we have too many laws which are not necessary. I mean, no offense to the party list system, but they keep on going around the world trying to find the best practices that is not applicable to us and try to put it here. The latest, some of the laws that hopefully will let pass, something like, this bill that Senator Tolentino filed that you cannot call your people who are at home during the rest days, things like those. This is something that is being done in France, but I don't know why it has. It's even criminalized, no? if they are on the rest day and you call them, it's even. These are the kind of laws that we think we should eliminate. And I agree, we should modernize our labor code. The only problem is how do we do it under the present setup? With many of the legislators even are the ones dictating what will be there. So even the issue of contractualization, or no sort of, we cannot solve. What more if we revise our labor code, which really need to update? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. June and Dr. Vic. That's very insightful. And especially on, I think, what we see in other countries in terms of their legislation, where they've also looked at, the quality of the life of employees, including not being interrupted on weekends and on holidays. And on that note, I think also on the topic of jobs, one of the questions here is also very relevant in terms of, the quality of jobs that, or the growth that we also get. And one of the enduring challenges for the Philippines is how to translate economic growth into inclusive growth. So someone asked, over the last decade, the country has experienced what may be called jobless growth. What role can the business community play in ensuring that the gains of economic growth are spread more evenly? So this goes to any of our speakers.
Karen,
Yes, Dr. Vic.
I think that I strongly believe that if you focus on increasing the productivity of workers, that at least in the long run, that would result in increased demand for labor, and at the same time raise the workers' remuneration. Because there is a strong positive correlation between productivity of labor, increasing productivity of labor, and the remunerations, not necessarily the basic wage, but the total compensation per worker. So that particularly if that is combined with good quality education that would provide the skills, productive skills to the lower levels of our of the workers population, that would almost certainly result in at least increasing or decreasing the poverty rate. In other words, I think it will be more inclusive to have to focus on policies that increases the skills of labor and at the same time the productivity of labor over time.
Karen?
Yes, of course. Dr. Ginigundo.
Yeah, I fully agree with Vic that an increase in labor productivity can actually attract more demand for labor, and therefore job generation is made easier. At the same time, let me reiterate the need for or imperative of an investment-led growth. And not only just a simple investment-led growth, but the investment should be of high quality. For example, in the case of the healthcare system, I think this is one of the areas where investment can be funneled. In the past, we have seen in the last 2 years that there was a very serious underinvestment in the healthcare system. Not only that, but also in terms of safe buildings, safe transportation, and digital infrastructure. Disease surveillance and preparedness also need great amount of investment. Now, if we are able to invest in this very pioneering areas of the economy, I think we can also produce and generate more jobs. Financial and economic inclusion will also require support on small and micro, small, and medium enterprises. More than 97% of firms in the Philippines are small businesses. So if we can also provide support through a more inclusive financial system, credit system in the economy, I think we can also provide more opportunities for our people. And that's the quickest way to generate and encourage more job opportunities for our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anything to add, Dr. Vic, Mr. June?
Yes, I'd like to add to what Diwa mentioned, and I agree with him that in fact the accumulation of physical capital and in fact investment do actually help to push also the indicator of remuneration per worker or rising incomes for workers. And if you look at, for example, indicator for capital per worker and compensation per worker over time in the Philippines, you'll see that holding other things constant, that the increase in capital per worker increases tend to be highly correlated with compensation per worker. By compensation, I defined it to mean not just the basic wage, but the benefits and other types of remunerations that are received by the workers.
Karen, you're on mute.
Hi.
Perfect.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. I think, yeah, because we're all on overtime, I'm also talking to someone in a meeting. But the next question we have is on investment-led growth. So investment-led growth undoubtedly will improve the delivery of essential goods and services in the country. Digital and physical infrastructure in particular stand to benefit. However, what steps would you suggest the government take in order to protect the interests of small and medium-sized businesses or MSMEs?
I think
Sorry,
we have partly addressed that issue of small business by saying that while infrastructure support in terms of the other collaterals for inspiring and encouraging more business activities and help big business, I think the government has also provided support to small business in terms of ensuring that the banks are also providing better access to financial resources from the banks. In terms of financial inclusion, for example, digital solution has been an important solution in ensuring that more and more people will have access to banking services and products. I think that's very important. Second is, of course, in terms of financial literacy and education. We need to educate our people on what is available out there and provide support to small business activities. So I think these are important activities that the government can focus on, not only in terms of fiscal support, but also in terms of banking and monetary support from the monetary authorities.
Karen?
Thank you. Dr. Vic?
Yes, I have, it's not going to maybe solve all the problems of these small, medium scale enterprises, but there's I think a policy that hurts the medium, significantly hurt the medium and small scale enterprises, and that is shown by empirical work that shows that high minimum wages hurt the medium and small scale enterprises, as reflected in their hiring of laborers, of workers. While the big companies, actually, the correlation between increases in minimum wages rather than negative with correlation with employment, that is, there is a positive correlation. So I think the policies mandates like minimum wages, particularly if they cut across all kinds of firms, one size fits all type, that it will hurt more the ability of small and medium scale enterprises to employ more people and produce more. The other thing is that the other thing that I think policymakers need to be very about and need to be more flexible is the regulations about prohibition of temporary employment. I think that enterprises, especially when they start small, they're faced with all kinds of uncertainty. Particularly innovative enterprises, where you really cannot yet, you have not established yourself, and yet you're forced to hire on a permanent basis workers. So I think there should be carved out some kind of exceptions, at least for, let's say, the first 5 years, so that these firms, these small, medium-sized firms, can be established and be innovative, try out new things without having to get stuck with, overhead costs, including permanently or regularly employed workers, which will hobble these types of firms. So what I'm saying is, I think policymakers should think through again this one-size-fits-all mandates and carve out certain exception for those that are just really new and small size companies or enterprises.
Thank you, Dr. Vic. And I think, sorry, Mr. Pascual.
Yeah, quite apart from policy actions, I think it's important that the government start implementing programs that will enable regional development to become a reality. We have always been saying that there is too much concentration in the national capital region in terms of businesses. And in the meantime, our provincial areas, particularly the farming sector, is neglected. For example, in agriculture, where most poverty in the agricultural sector, where there is significant poverty, I think the government should start implementing programs that will provide irrigation to our farmlands and modernize agriculture. Like RCEP should have been passed already, but Senate has dilly-dallied because of resistance from farmer groups who contend that they will be the victims, while industrial businesses will benefit from RCEP. But that can only happen because our farming sector is very unproductive. We have to raise the productivity through modernization. And then in each region, these state universities and colleges there should start getting involved in providing training and sort of lifelong learning to the people in the region with respect to the kind of businesses, particularly in the micro, small, and medium areas, where the people there can be engaged. Each region has a particular advantage, resource endowment, and the people should be guided as to how these resources in the different regions can be managed so that value addition can be achieved through the creation of productive enterprises that will process, for example, the farm outputs. It has to be a very integrated program that the government should embark on. Of course, I support the policy prescriptions from our colleagues, but there has to be more than just policy. There has to be specific programs that will point out the opportunities in each of the regions of the country where value creation could be achieved, making full use of the natural endowments in those different regions.
Karen?
Thank you. And I will give the final word to Dr. Ginigundo. I wish we had
Okay.
more time, but
We
yeah.
cannot disagree with Fred's point. But I think at this point, local governments would have little excuse not to be able to provide support to business, whether small or medium enterprises, because of the operation of the Mandanas Garcia bill, which the Supreme Court declared constitutional. They will have more share of the internal allotment or the internal revenue allotment, which would include customs intake or customs revenues. So many of the usual operations of government have been devolved to the local government. So the undertaking of some of these infrastructure projects, whether irrigation or even infrastructure, roads, bridges, will now have to be increasingly undertaken by the local government. I think what is needed is actually a good blueprint of how to pursue regional dispersal and modernization program. Not the kind of haphazard or half-baked kind of program and projects that leads to nowhere. So I think it's important that the national government under the new administration provide an overall blueprint and let the local governments pursue the actual operation on the ground. Thank you very much, Karen.
Kevin, I have
Thank you,
one
Dr.
question
Ginigundo.
regarding this question.
Okay, I'm trying to catch Professor Manhit's eyes to see because we're super overtime. But okay, we'll grant that, Dr. Vic.
No,
Okay.
my question really is whether we should be encouraging and how in the concept of a value chain where small scale operations or enterprises is able to feed into the larger network of companies, maybe one of the panelists can speak to that issue.
Thank you, Dr. Vic. So this has really been super insightful, and I think I wish that we can all consolidate this and really provide this publicly, and hopefully for the next administration, whoever wins as president and vice president, that they can pick up from a lot of the insights from the business community, especially since a lot of our business leaders have been around for so long, so much longer than any of the administrations that have served us. And on that note, we shall close this forum with closing remarks from Professor Dindo Manhit, President of Strat-Based ADR Institute.
Karen, thank you so much for as always moderating a good discussion among thought leaders, in this case from our top economists and also business leaders representing different business associations. We are really proud of the panel that we have had this morning. Thankful also for the participants. I think we had a little over 200 participants. But we are here to discuss the business agenda with the objective of trying to link up the business agenda to the challenges of the post-COVID Philippines. Since April 2020, we have tracked what we call 8 pandemic challenges that is confronting Philippine society. And at the core of this is always economic, financial challenges for the Filipino people. And as we try to understand the views of the Filipino public. We have partnered with different institutions, trying to understand what are their concerns as we enter the national election. Consistent with what we saw is that we are dealing with the economic consequences of this pandemic. Exactly nearly 2 years ago, what we saw in the data this January, a few weeks back, what we saw in the data of December, that the challenges of prices, poverty and hunger, jobs and wages continue to be on the top of mind of the Filipino voters. And when we specifically ask this question, what should the next administration do? We asked this right after the filing of candidacy. 8 out of 10 Filipinos speaks of the need to provide jobs. But who can provide jobs? Is it really government? Or are they simply here to create the environment for jobs to be created? And this is where I believe the role of the private sector is very important. Key to this is understanding that they have a big role to play, and the public across, we wanted to emphasize this, across demographics, age groups, geographic area, social classes, see the value of the private sector. They see them as 81% that they are needed to invest in critical in public infrastructure. As we spoke of digital infrastructure to push greater trade and commerce in our country. As we speak of growth that can uplift the lives of our people, we see 82% of Filipinos saying we want the private sector to collaborate, or in this case, the government to collaborate with the private sector. They're very important. And when we asked last December, 8 areas where they were identified, where the private sector can address, help boost the Philippine economy. Again, consistent, uplifting the lives of people, creating jobs, expanding livelihood opportunities, but even improving healthcare, quality of education, digital services, and developing public enterprises. What this data is telling us from our research with our partners is that what is key to sustaining economic recovery is electing a good and trustworthy leader who's willing and capable of solving these predicaments, whose administration will be anchored on the rule of law, but will build on the partnership with the private sector. As we heard this past 2.5 hours, the business agenda for the next government, I'd like to offer my thought. As I listen, I'd like to share my thought with regards to what do we need to ask for our next leaders, be it the executive, legislative branch. As I hear the private sector, as I read through data representing different demographics of our country's next leaders should actively encourage collaboration between government and the private sector, which has proven itself as a trusted and capable partner for development, and even during these hard COVID times. We need investments by the private sector because they are integral to national development. As these endeavors create jobs, provide income, security, and alleviate poverty. Towards this end, it is crucial that transparency is institutionalized across all levels of government, both at the national and local government. After all, transparency breeds good governance, which in turn creates the public trust needed by national leadership to bring the country forward to sustainable recovery post-election, post-pandemic. And there's no better time to effect this fundamental change than now, because we are in the midst of a watershed year in our political and economic history. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We will continue to this advocacy for the private sector to help create jobs, to help investment that will lead to growth and uplift the lives of the Filipino people. Thank you in behalf of the Albert Dorsar Institute, the Strat-based Group, and Bauer Group Asia. Thank you so much, Karen, for everything. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.